All right, welcome everybody. Good morning. My name is Ryan Romero. And this is Getting Started with Microsoft Teams. This is a top-level overview of Microsoft Teams and deployments. If you're an administrator looking to deploy Teams in a new tenant environment, or if you're upgrading from an existing Skype for Business online or on premises. And we'll also talk a little bit about your options if you're migrating from a third-party service, whether it's Cisco or Zoom or something like that. We'll talk to you about where you can go to get the help that you need in order to do some of those really intricate migration, especially if you're heavily involved with calling PSTN, SBCs, and things like that. Just quick notes before we get started. If you have any questions, I want to make sure everybody gets the most out of this. We have a 2-hour session, so you can go ahead and type them as we roll through the presentation here, and I'll do my best to make sure that your questions are answered either individually or with the context of the presentation. And then there will be about 20 to 25 minutes worth of time at the end of this presentation for live demonstrations with the Client Center, the Admin Center, the portal itself, as well as open for Q&A. So if you have any questions or you would like me to demonstrate anything, I'm more than happy to do that. And thank you everybody for being here. Let's get started. So introduce myself again. My name is Ryan Romero. I'm a senior cloud training architect at Copsgility and Skill Me Up. I've been involved with the cloud, including AWS, Azure, and most recently Microsoft Teams as an administrator. I've been in IT and working in the private and defense sector for over 10 years before I really got specialized in the cloud, and will actually be completing my master's degree in cloud computing architecture. If you want to reach out to me further, the best way to reach me is at my Copsgility email, which is listed here, and then also LinkedIn. I have a presence there as well, or on Twitter, so you can follow us there, or the Copsgility or Skill Me Up Twitter handles. Okay, so here's all the topics that we're going to get into today. We're going to first start with Teams and current events, especially what's going on with COVID-19 and Microsoft's response and some of the options available to you if you're looking to get started with Teams. Then we're going to go into a feature overview. We'll talk about all the key features and the concepts that as administrators you should be aware of when you're deploying Teams and being able to leverage it best for your workloads. We'll talk about the technical requirements needed for your network, for your clients, your end users, your administrators, in order to deploy Teams in your environment. Then we'll move on to deployment plans and strategies, the different approaches that you can take to deliver Teams to your environment, whether it's multi-phase, single-phase, jump. If you're migrating from Skype for Business, how you can have some coexistence there with both the applications, a couple different options that you can think about. And then we'll move on into getting started with Teams, the bare minimums that you need to get up and running, and then we'll move into our demonstrations with the test environment that we have, and then open it up to some Q&A or any additional demonstrations that you guys are you might request or have, or anything like that. All right, so Microsoft Teams and current events. So obviously COVID has impacted everyone throughout the world, and work from home has become a huge topic, one of the most popular topics right now for everybody being able to continue to work. And Microsoft has responded very well to supporting this need. They've made some adjustments to their current offerings, and I have a breakdown in the next slide. But for now, if you're in a situation where you need an immediate solution for being able to collaborate remotely, whether it's in remote offices or work from home, on the road, internationally, either as a small business, as an individual, or as an enterprise, there's a solution for you. And when Microsoft is publishing reports about bi-weekly about their usage, updating their offerings that you can go check out if you were to just search on the internet for the latest offerings that they have. And they're standing up actually dedicated web pages and support just in response to this, so you can get something that's rapidly deployable and appropriate to you. So what we are always advising people to do if they want to get started with Teams, or at least play around with it, is to first check with their work email, or if they have a school email, especially if it's hosted on Office 365 is to go ahead and try, because Microsoft has pushed Teams, or at least a freemium version, to a lot of these existing tenants if it wasn't there already, for you to at least try and support of work from home during COVID-19. So go ahead and try that first. If not, and you don't have it, and you have a standard Gmail account, personal account, or a Hotmail account, you can sign up and get the freemium version of Teams as well, and then allow you to collaborate directly with people via like the IP and calling. So you're not going to get all of the additional collaboration services that we're going to talk about today, but it is just a way, if I need something to have a meeting, a direct call with somebody on Teams, I can do that. And that's with other users, either in an enterprise environment or not. And then we have free business essentials for 6 months. That's a current offering that Microsoft's doing in response to COVID-19, as well as 365 E1 for enterprise if you're not already a current customer. And I've got a breakdown following this so you can see the different features that go on with that. But it's a great solution for you with no commitment. If you want to at least try it and see if it works for you, maybe you have another solution right now, either with a competitor or with your own on-premise solution or what have you, but you need to stand up something without impacting your production system. You can go ahead and sandbox and test in there and see if it'll work for you. And then that goes as well for educational institutions, though they have a separate offering for how they manage their licenses for students and faculty and things like that. And then just talking a little bit about what Microsoft is doing technically to support the demand and the workload, and that's really come about in the past month since we've really kicked things off here for work from home in March. So it's been able to support as many as 44 million users worldwide, and Teams is a worldwide cloud-based service. It's pretty impressive to be able to respond to that, and that was about a 43% increase of what they were seeing before, people using Teams, and that's video calls, group meetings, document sharing, everything that Teams has to offer. And then for their high availability, they're really bolstering their systems. So Teams is hosted within the Microsoft Cloud Azure environment, and they've pivoted and transitioned in some resources, their hardware resources within data centers, to really support this service as it's really taken off, in addition to making sure that their Azure services for infrastructure are available as well. And doing their best to, if there is an outage, it is a cloud-based service, for whatever reason, that those incidents are isolated to the specific location and not too widespread. And then they're also transitioning a lot of their people internally to be able to support just Teams, and that's either by giving training online, in support centers and call-ins, things like that, generating new content that you can consume, updating technical documentation, things like that. So if you need to get started right now and you need all the latest information, that link at the bottom of this slide here is a great place for you to start, and it has all of the resources right there that you need to know to get up and running. Okay, so special offerings for new customers as of April 2020. So in response to COVID-19 is that that Office 365 Business Essentials and Enterprise E1 are available for the 6 months. And the table below really describes the difference with those. The only difference really being is that with the enterprise level, you get the downloadable desktop apps for Office. That's not just Teams. That's Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Exchange, everything that you would need there. And then Office Business Essentials Online is just the online version of all the apps. So you're going through a web browser. You can still get on Word. You can still collaborate in real time with others. You can still have SharePoint and meetings and all these things, but there's nothing actually downloaded to your desktop. But more notably, talking about the free version right now. So the freemium used to just only be a video and audio IP calling solution, and they've bolstered that to add file sharing and temporary file sharing storage with Skype for Business, or I'm sorry, with OneDrive for Business. So a storage place for those files, because that's what the service relies on, is that you have a place to store those files. But they're now offering that for free. It's unlimited. It's a good way to test some of the features out, see if it's right for you without any commitment, to work with external clients, customers, agents, if they are, they're isolated or they don't have support for that. It's a great way for them to get started as well. But what this doesn't include is the ability to schedule meetings. And we'll talk about some of the differences between just IP video calls, audio calls, and then a meeting, they're actually different, and the capabilities that come into there, even though you're still having a virtual meeting online where you can share your screen, talk, and record video. But so you'd only be able to call somebody directly with the freemium version. You wouldn't be able to schedule something and then send them an email with like a link for them to get in. A note for existing customers. So Microsoft is constantly changing, unfortunately, how they're naming their products, especially for cloud offerings. So one of the asked questions in the past we've had with this is like, I've been on Microsoft Commercial Cloud Trial, and that's something that's been renamed to Teams Exploratory Experience. So these offerings are for customers that are currently have an enterprise solution with Microsoft or Office 365, but wanted to try Teams out, but without inhibiting their production workloads or their communication if it's on Skype for Business or what have you. And those were only allowing at first for you to have that freemium experience where it's like you can only directly call and meet now with somebody. You couldn't schedule something. That's been updated, so you should be able to reach out to your Microsoft product vendor and talk about if Teams Exploratory Experience is available for your environment and what the limits are and the capabilities are there, because it will depend on your specific deployment of your tenant within your environment, what you can do there. Again, there's a link at the bottom here. So Microsoft Teams Free is a dedicated page just talking about what they're offering right now. And I believe all of these offers are good through June of this year. I don't know if they're going to be extending those though. All right, so we're going to move into the Teams features overview. We're going to talk about, from a top level, how to think about Teams, and then we'll talk about all the key features that administrators really want to know and get into some of the, I'd say the hot spots that we've gotten doing some of these seminars and what people really want to know as they migrate to Teams as far as administrative effort and technical specifications they need to be aware of. All right, so just to make sure that everybody's on the same baseline when we start talking about the key features of Teams, just want to make sure that everybody understands that Teams is really being delivered as Microsoft as an all-in-one collaboration service. They're really pushing that it can replace a lot of either a single solution that you have for communication or office productivity collaboration, or multiple if you have multiple into one space. It's not just audio and video calling or recording or screen sharing. It's, remote support capable. It's file sharing both privately and publicly. You can do live events. You can integrate your on-premise phone systems. You can do so many things and have very sophisticated levels of information privacy, data security, automation with groups and roles and rights assignments, and then integrations with already existing solutions such as SharePoint, Exchange, and other apps that you might be using. So if you're standing up a new tenant, all of these things will come with it. But if you already have an existing Office 365 environment, it works well with your existing Office 365 online solution. So Microsoft Teams is cloud hosted. And to define cloud hosted, it means the service is fully within the Microsoft Azure cloud. It is their responsibility to deliver the service to their customers over the internet and maintain their services wherever they offer them, which right now is throughout the world. But you're responsible, the customer is responsible for managing the levels of security inside, not at the baseline level, but how you want your information to flow between either your teams or outside your tenant to external clients or customers or with federation. So they deliver the service to you, but it's up to you how you customize it and set it up yourself. There is SLAs included with agreements, and those might change every once in a while due to the amount of hardware resources they're giving or dedicating in the cloud to this. And just to talk a little bit, I can give you a real world example about those as far as reliability goes. I've been working with teams in the field for several clients over the past 2 years, and I've really only been subject to, I'd say, 2 major outages where I wasn't able to access Teams communication, but I was able to get to my files or things like that. And those only lasted for about 4 hours. I was East Coast US based, and I believe those were the only areas in Europe that were impacted. And they lasted between 4 and 8 hours. So that was over the span of 2 years. Teams is a upgrade for Skype for Business. I know a lot of customers and clients, this has been a hot spot as well when they first introduced Teams, that it is going to replace Skype for Business, and that current plan to replace is on track to switch over in July of 2021. I don't know if that's going to change due to current events, but it is an upgrade. There are coexistence options that we're going to get into about that today. But it's not a this or that. I'd like to stay on my Skype for Business while I have Teams. Yeah, you can do that right now, but it is going to eventually replace it. And that includes hardware as well. If you're invested in IP phones and smart rooms or Skype meeting rooms and things like that, there may be some backwards compatibility for you, but it's not guaranteed. So there's multiple platforms that you can use Teams with. That's both as desktop and web apps and mobile. There's support for all the major desktops, both mobile, Mac and iOS and Android. And then it's also capable within a virtualized environment. If you're heavily virtualized and that's how you distribute desktops to your users, it will work. It'll just take a little bit more administration on your part. And then you can integrate apps as well. I love to give the example of if you're using Power BI to assess some data, some information, generate some insight, you can integrate that with your workflows with Teams. So Teams is touted as very secure. Its kinetic and static data is encrypted out of the box. So a client delivering or communicating over Teams from their desktop to the server is encrypted in motion. And then as a baseline, it's encrypted at rest, but you can also apply your own customization for how your data at rest is handled to meet certain security requirements at various levels. If you have certain compliance rules that you need to meet for certain types of data, certain levels of data, and you can customize that especially according to your level of Office 365 enterprise licensing. So determining if you're like an E1 or an E3 or E5 will determine how granular you can really get. And Teams is all based on the four concepts that Microsoft likes to put out of you're able to communicate, you're able to collaborate, you're able to customize the experience for your users, and you can do that confidently knowing that your data is secure. All right, so our key features list for Teams, there's a lot here, but we really wanted to give everybody a one-page all they need to know about all the core features and how to think about them. And we'll spend a lot of time on this before we move on, just to make sure. This usually generates a lot of questions, and you can go ahead and ask those. And I'll try to answer them in real time or write them down and address them later on in the demo or at the end of the FAQ. So let's get started here. Private chat, number one. So when we talk about the term chat, let's try to avoid using it interchangeably when we're talking about meeting chat or Teams chat. Private chat is really an isolated feature within Teams that can be your person-to-person or private group chat solution, and that's your messaging and things like that. But that's separate from chatting with a team or within a Teams channel, which we'll go over in a little bit. They're private. They're linked to your Exchange mailbox, the user's Exchange mailbox. You still have your capabilities of your screen share, your remote control if you want to hand somebody control or a presentation or to manipulate something on your desktop that you have shared, and the ability to take that back. And then you have your private file share built on OneDrive for Business. So if you want to be able to do file share privately with either a specific user or a group of specific users outside of the Teams or the Teams channel scope, you would need to have that OneDrive for Business account set up for that user in Office 365 and the Exchange mailbox. Again, that's private, but as top level administrators, if you're a global administrator, team service administrator, or data administrator at that level, you can configure your different privileges to go in and be able to manage that data as you need to, as well as life cycling. Okay, so number two, calling. So calling is more of it includes both the IP audio and video calling that we're all familiar with right now, the face to face or just voice, or being able to share my screen and give a presentation or do my daily stand-up meeting with my team. That can be that moves in and out of calling and private chat and Teams depending on how and the scope that you want to use that for, the group of people that you want to communicate with. But it also includes your integrations with your dialing plan, your calling plan, your phone number plan, and your solution there. So you can have a Microsoft VoIP all solution, everything with Microsoft. You can have their calling plan in their phone system where Microsoft manages the phone numbers they give you. You can customize how those phone numbers are associated within your environment, within your users, within resource accounts for call queues and call attendants, which are also available in Teams. Or you can do some direct routing solutions if you don't want to fully transition to a Microsoft managed service. You can, if you have an existing SBC and PSTN solution and you want to keep those, you can integrate that as well. And we won't go into too much detail of that just because it's so case specific, and Microsoft will even tell you it's best to establish some support with both Microsoft and the vendor for your hardware that's working on that. But I do have some notes towards the end about some certified Teams hardware for calling, as well as like IP phones and devices, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But just to wrap that up there for calling, call queues and auto attendants are a feature within Teams if you're going with that full Microsoft VoIP solution. So you can manage a fully modern calling tree and service for your business if you needed to. And that does include all the features you would expect, like caller ID, transfer, waiting, voicemail, etc. All right, so number three, meetings. So, and I put 250 max user here limit here because it's very important, especially with what's going on right now. And it's also good to differentiate how meetings are different from just a peer-to-peer video call or audio call, or let's say a live event, which is number 7. So meetings go hand in hand with the term scheduled. So meetings are, you can think of them in the same way as I'm going to go into my Exchange calendar and set a meeting and add some people and add some information. And most of us are familiar with having, our add-on, whether it's like WebEx or Skype for Business, that will put in a Skype for Business link or a meeting link that anybody can access, and maybe even a conference bridge number that you can call in. And that's what we're really talking about here with meetings. And you can either host meetings from your own account and store the meeting information on your own Exchange mailbox, or you can kind of automate and have your group, your users for that meeting pre-selected if you want to host it within the channel, and then that will host that meeting based on the group mailbox in Exchange that's generated when you create a new team or a channel. So for meetings, you can also have guest access, external access, and anonymous users. Those are 3 separate concepts. They're used kind of interchangeably out in the world right now, but I'm really trying to help customers understand that they're different. So guest access would be granting somebody not in your organization access to Teams collaboration. So they're able to go into the Teams client. They can see different teams or ones they've been added to. They can collaborate on documents, share things, post to the message boards, things like that. They can join meetings, right? And they don't need a Office 365 account generated for them. However, the email that you send it to for them to join as a guest user will be ingested in your Azure Active Directory, and that's how you'll manage that user. So you're actually adding them to Active Directory. External access is the same as federated access. If you are currently having that solution with your Skype for Business or another solution with your current directory services, and that just allows for your users to communicate and set up meetings with other users that are federated or authorized. So if you have like a business-to-business connection. And then anonymous users, that is what really gives you that ability to bring anybody into a Teams scheduled meeting, which is that I have this link here for Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to be able to email it or send it to anybody, or send the conferencing number to those people, and they can authenticate even without being brought into your Azure domain or just with any email that you provide. And then so meetings ties back into the capabilities with your audio and video calling. You can have screen sharing and you can record, and you can only record within a scheduled meeting. You can't do recordings if you just call somebody directly. You would have to set up that or promote that call to a meeting if you wanted to record it. And of course, recording has to be made available in the features within the settings of Teams, which we'll go over, and remote control. So you can do remote control within a group of people. And you can, that's really great if you want to have a recurring meeting and you want to go over some things with your users, and you can transition control of an application or your desktop if you're presenting and sharing, and you can take that back at any time. And it is currently working at levels for guest and external and anonymous users, but everybody has to be on the client. I know there's limited support if you're on the web app. Let's say you're going in through Teams through the browser and the web app. And that's not always been there. That's actually come available over the past year. And then you can tie your meetings in with your calling solution, so you can have those dial-in numbers just for audio calls. And then cool new features like background blur. So if you want to blur out, it'll just show you and blur out your background if you're working from home or if you're in a busy environment in the background. Picture in picture, so that means that you can be working really diligently while on a Teams meeting, or if you're just listening in but you need to do some other stuff, you can manipulate how the video is shared and the size of it, and you can have multiple moving heads or multiple screens showing at the same time. It's pretty intuitive. And then all the owner controls that you would expect if you want to do some crowd control, turn everybody's mics off, or only allow people to be on with audio, things like that. All right, so number 4, teams and channels. So the teams and channels, and we'll talk about the architecture for a little bit, is really where the full collaboration aspect of Teams comes into play, a lot of what people are interested in. And it does rely on the Office 365 groups within your tenant and Exchange Mailbox to be set up accordingly. So when you generate a new team, you get a new group mailbox, you get a new SharePoint site automatically where your files are hosted, and that gives you all of that collaboration in addition to what the things that Teams offers, the video calling and the direct chat and things like that. And this is a group board. So what I really like to urge customers and clients is that they do a really dedicated job in instructing their end users that private chat and Teams channels are different things. So a lot of what I'll see happen is someone will go into a team and they have their message board and their wiki and their OneNotes, and they'll write something in there, and they're still on that later, but they meant to go type that into a private chat with maybe a group of the same individuals that are within that team, but it'll be made available to everybody, and then anybody can go see it if that's an open channel, if it's not been set to public or not been set to private. So there is a little bit of a learning curve there to understand when you're communicating on a Teams board, a message board, because that data is stored within the SharePoint and the group mailbox rather than privately within your private chat and your user mailboxes. So just some differences there. You can have your app integration there via tabs. You can ingest new applications, the ones that are already available from Microsoft, the ones already being used in Teams. You can select which ones are allowed to be. If you have a current on-premises application that you want to ingest, you can do that as well. And then wrapping this up here again with the file sharing, the real-time document collaboration that takes place and is supported by SharePoint. So if you're sharing a document within a team, it's sharing it on SharePoint, and you could go collaborate on that document, whether it's in Teams or within SharePoint. It's the same place that you're doing it at. You don't have to replicate it and do it twice. And if you already have an existing SharePoint Online or document or file stores, you can just ingest those with Teams. You don't need to stand up a new team or a new channel and then copy everything over. You can just bring them over, as well as cross document library, cross collections and team sites. So if like I want a team, but I need a document library from another specific SharePoint site, I can just bring that in as a tab and work with that how I want to do that, so long as I have the right privileges set within SharePoint. Okay, so multiple platform support, we already talked about it a little bit, but just to recap is it's available on any Windows platform, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android, as well as the web browser support. And you can have multiple sign-ins. So I will say that currently, if you have multiple tenants that you need to access, multiple Office 365 accounts with Teams support, and you had Teams installed on your computer with your client, you couldn't open a separate client on the same desktop. Right now, I believe it's in the planning stages of the path for Microsoft to develop that, but you can still accomplish that by, let's say, you open your Teams client for one tenant for one email that you have, and then you can go into the web app on a browser and open the same client for another organization, which is actually what I'll do today during my demo, so you can see that. And then you could even do a third one if you were logging in on your mobile device to yet another tenant. But if you weren't doing any of that and you were just logging into one tenant and you could still get on in multiple places, let's say if you had multiple computers or you didn't want to install it or multiple phones, Teams works really well with multiple tenants and sign-ins at the same time. If you get a notification or a message sent to you, it's pretty smart in recognizing where you're at that time and not pinging all of your devices or not pinging any of your devices. I think we've all been here in the past where someone has sent a message, but it went to my phone and not my desktop, or desktop and not my phone, and I'm on the road. If you're at your desktop, it'll ping your desktop. If you've been away from your desktop for a little while, it'll ping your phone. It's really helpful, and I deal with it every day, especially getting up, and I get my notifications in one place on my phone until I get to my computer, and then they come into my computer throughout the workday, and then the rest go to my phone. And you can set that up how that your users are notified if you want to do some silencing of notifications and things like that. And then there's also proprietary support for hardware. So Microsoft is working closely with third parties to deliver Teams pre-installed on some hardware to work with if you have a smarter environment like with IP phones or Teams rooms. If you didn't have that, but let's say you had like a Microsoft Surface tablet, you could actually transition that into a Teams only device, and Microsoft has support for that. So very neat. Without getting too invested in other hardware that you don't have. But if you have Microsoft Surface tablets or anything with a Microsoft Windows installation, you could actually just isolate that as a team service and really leverage that. And you could turn it off. You could take the tablet with you if you wanted to redeploy it in another environment or for another use. So again, guest, external, anonymous access. This is something that's a big hotspot for people and how they can collaborate, because everybody is talking with people of different environments every day, whether they're internal, external, how they can control. And I have a slide that really breaks this down and how to think about that. But just know that it's there, and there pretty much isn't a solution for you. I mean, there isn't a solution that Microsoft can't help you with for being able to communicate, whether it's person to person, across the world. Somebody that you can ingest into your environment, so on and so forth. There's options for you there. Something we haven't talked about really yet is live events for enterprise. So if you have an enterprise license and with Microsoft Teams, you can host live events, which is a user maximum of up to 10,000, right? Different than just hosting a meeting. And then that's what I tell people, well, what's the difference? Well, if you have less than 250 people, just do the meeting, because it's very simple. It's no different than what you would normally do. But if you have way more than that, you can still host that and host it all within Teams. If you're a business that is heavily invested in you already have existing production hardware, software, conferencing rooms, mixers, things like that, you can still use that with Teams. It takes a little bit more work to ingest, but if you want to use Teams as the broadcasting platform, Microsoft Stream as the broadcasting platform, and other solutions with content delivery networks, you can do that. And the key difference, another functionality key difference there is that you have to schedule that in advance. Right now, I don't believe there's too many real world limitations that you would run into. I believe it's like you can have 5 concurrent live events right now if you're an enterprise level, so that would be 50,000 users. But I don't know if there's a max amount that you can have, but I will tell you that it's not, if you're constantly doing a bunch of live events, that could be accommodated by meetings. Microsoft might kind of push you to just say, hey, let's just do meetings right now instead of live events, and there's also less overhead with how to set that up. And with that, you get everything that you would expect from a modern live event hosting service. You get your crowd moderation, your attendee reports. You can have multiple presenters wherever they are, as long as they have a reliable internet connection and be able to share their screen. And you can choose, if you don't want to use the Microsoft streaming service to deliver at the user level, you can route your stream service to a third-party content delivery network service. Especially if there was a targeted group of users or geolocation that for some reason isn't able to access Azure or Microsoft cloud services. This is really specifically China. I can tell you that right now, if you needed to deliver a live event from the US to China, you would actually have to port that through a VPN and a third-party content delivery network service. But it is available. Other than that, Azure and being able to access those streams over the internet is pretty much available all over the world. Right. So number 8 here is security and compliance. Does rely on Azure AD. And don't worry if you're wondering about Azure AD. If you have Teams in a business or an enterprise environment, you have Azure Directory. And it works hand in hand. So you can manage your group policies in there, your group management, your automation of how people are moved in and out of groups, your life cycling, multi-factor authentication, access policies for where they'll be able to access from, like geolocation or a certain client or a certain IP range, or maybe their desktop, their Windows installation needs to meet a certain needs to have an update before it can sign on. You can do all those things as well. This is a little bit more heavy in the Office 365 administrator part. And towards the end of this webinar, I'll talk about the different certifications that you could approach for getting really specialized with Teams or Office 365 Administrator and the topics that they'll cover, but it does go into a little bit more outside of just managing Teams. And those options include things like information barriers, sensitivity labels. Those are new concepts. The sensitivity labels they're replacing classification labels if you've worked with those before, and that allow you to set up barriers for how information that is generated or used within Teams from your users, like files or emails or chats, can move within Teams or outside your Office 365 environment with external users or things like that. And then finally, modifying any piece of data within Teams, whether it's just a Word document, SharePoint page, something like that. We're all familiar with, what can a user do for their privileges: read, write, modify, delete, archive, and restore. You can get granular with how all of those things work. You can include a soft delete process and how your life cycling works and really meet any requirements that you might have for your compliance. So Teams has monitoring and reports out of the box for its usage, device usage, and then from there it gets really more focused on the calling features. So there's a call quality dashboard, there's a network analytics report that you can run. So much more focused on the bandwidth that you're using, call quality with your SBC or EPSTN solution, especially if you have users reporting that they just can't get connected or they're having latency or jitter. You can go in and see those reports and divvy those out to your help desk community at different role levels to be able to see that information. And a quick note here about that, since we're talking about call quality, and if you've been a Skype for Business user for a long time and maybe came from an on-premise environment or a solution where all of that's being handled on-premise, and you run into the common problem of just not having great call quality, on a group call or whatever, Microsoft Teams is really an evolution in this kind of call quality experience, because it's all in the cloud, right? So if somebody has an issue with their call quality, it's most likely isolated to their internet connection. Now that can affect your entire group of users if they're in an office and all their connections are routing through your network backbone to the internet. But that it might be the internet solution itself, not necessarily a server that you're managing that's not working that well or being overloaded or not at capacity or things like that. All right, so the last one, number 10 here, automation and PowerShell. So Microsoft Teams does rely on PowerShell to accomplish some tasks, and those tasks are usually the automation tasks that you would like to see in larger environments for managing massive, I wouldn't say massive, but larger groups of users. It's really sophisticated policies and features, being able to generate reports down to like very simple CSV level. And there's multiple modules that are needed right now to manage some of those features from PowerShell. So there is some integration with current modules like the Skype for Business module, the Office 365 module, but there are some upgrades that rely on the new modules like Azure AD, Azure AD Preview, especially because if you're familiar with this term MSOL, the MSOL module has been retired. Okay, so that was a lot, but normally this is where we get most of the questions generated. I haven't seen anything come through yet, and if I miss something, someone please send me a ping. But for now, we'll move on. We're about 45 minutes in. We've got an hour and about an hour and 15 left. All right, so aside from all those features, what does the Teams experience look like for the user, and what does that look like for your organization, right? So keeping with what we talked about with the private chat and the calling and the private file share, that's really the user experience. It's all available within the same client, attached to their Exchange mailbox, and they're able to do that work in there without that being seen by the rest of the team or channels or affecting other apps. But if they wanted to communicate within that team that they're added to or they're configured with, then they would go through at that level. Either they can communicate at the team level with everybody in the team, and then there's the channel level, which is essentially just dividing teams into sub-teams based on whatever criteria you want. It doesn't have to be smaller groups of people. It could be a project. It could be I have a new project within this team and I want to open a new channel for it, and that'll isolate the file collaboration going on within that channel rather than the entire team. And then you could even say, let's say you have a team that's public that people can openly join or leave or be invited to. You could have a private channel in there if you had a project that you wanted to keep close hold with certain people working on that only certain people can view, and keep those documents isolated as well. You could do that. And then within the channel is where you would get the messaging for each channel and then any of the apps that you integrate. And you could build templates for channels, templates for teams, templates for what groups are automatically added or removed. You can get really granular with how you want to manage that, like automation piece, rather than building everything from scratch. So on the right side here, we have an example of what that might look like in a really simple scenario. So like you have a shipping team that is a team within your tenant, right? And then you have outgoing shipments and incoming shipments, and they might rely on different users, different times that they're working, or different documents, different applications where the information and the data flows in and out from. And instead of just creating two teams, you could just create two channels. So maybe your shipping team management can have oversight over all of it rather managing than two teams. There is a little bit of functionality loss as far as division of, let's say, I'm going to go with like users or how your data is stored on SharePoint when you're talking about the difference of making a new team versus making a sub-channel. So as you play around with that, you would just need to determine this is kind of how you want to set up your environment and set it up for your users, what they're able to create on their own, how you want your things. Some businesses will go just all teams and very limited channels. Some businesses go with a few teams and a lot of channels. So it's up to you how you can manage those things. All right, so real quickly, what does it look like for a team member versus a team owner and what they're able to do when I assign them to a team? This is a quick breakdown here. I'll leave this up for a few moments here so you can take a look here. But obviously, a team owner is able to manage his team, manage the group, the Office 365 group that those members are assigned to, that gives them access to the team, invite new people, leave new people. All of those things that you expect of an owner without giving them administrator privileges to managing the entire team's tenant for your Office 365 environment. And there is a middle in between there. There's a team's associate manager instead of giving like a global administrator. And then if you're just a team member, you're just invited to a team. Obviously, you can you'd have less administration over how that team looks. You could leave it on your own if you wanted to, and if you're allowed to, you could create your own channels within that team and work how you want in there. But this is just the default layout for how those privileges work. Helps you design how you want to deploy your teams to your teams, your users, your managers. All right, so guest access, external access, and anonymous users. This is, again, a hotspot that most people really have a lot of questions about, and it can get tricky to understand, especially because Microsoft is constantly changing capabilities and features, not necessarily taking them away, but really rapidly deploying some new things that maybe weren't available before, or available with a license or an offering that has been replaced now. So let's get a little bit more granular with that. Let's talk about guest access. So what does it mean to give somebody guest access? It means that you're granting somebody not within your Azure Active Directory access to Teams functionality and to be able to collaborate on documents, to be able to join IP video calls, to be able to write on the message board. You can have them, if they're in the team, they could meet now with members inside the team. That is like clicking on somebody or a group of people and say, hey, I need to meet now, or let's talk about something urgent that's came up. But they can't schedule meetings. And the reason they can't schedule meetings and attach and like send an email out that, hey, there's a future meeting, or do a recurrence, or attach a join link, is because they don't have an Exchange mailbox within your tenant. If they need to have that functionality, they have to be given an Office 365 account with an Exchange mailbox within your environment, or be federated and host it within their own Exchange mailbox. So that is a limitation with the guest access. So external access, again, it's synonymous with federation. If you're already currently doing that, that's giving people trust, giving other businesses and Office 365 tenants trust to yours, where individuals can go and open a new email or open Teams, search for somebody in another business, and it pops up automatically, and they can communicate with those people without having to go outside the Office 365 and the Azure cloud environment. It'll just deliver it to them directly. But this is only communication level. There's no access to the collaboration features within a team. So like the file sharing and the message board. This just makes things a little bit easier to add people that you're constantly communicating with in terms of scheduled meetings. So if I'm federated with somebody, you gain the ability to have these scheduled meetings, because if I'm federated with another office and I schedule a meeting with users from the other office, the Teams meeting is hosted within my tenant, and I can still do that because I have an Exchange account. If they want to schedule a meeting with me, the meeting is hosted within their tenant, even though I still have access to the link that's sent to me from the email. Okay, so last is anonymous users, and this really brings in again any questions about would there ever be a situation where I couldn't get somebody on an IP or video call? And really, no. You could always be able to do that, and somehow, however you want to implement it. So you can get somebody on a call, a meeting, via anonymous user access. That's when you send that scheduled meeting. Let's join Teams here, follow this link, send it to anybody, and then if you did want to give them guest access, you did want to add them to the Azure directory, they just sign in. It says, I'm a guest user, here's my name, here's my email, and then you can set the features that those people are able to do. You can control whether they're able to jump in the meeting without you, if it's because it's a scheduled meeting, or you can customize it to like they need to sit in the waiting room until a presenter becomes available or joins the meeting. Or you can have them join directly. And then currently, you can still do a lot of that functionality with screen sharing, passing it to anonymous user, have them present, and doing the remote control as well. Kind of get down to like the baseline. There's like if you can meet with somebody and somehow they can get connected to a meeting, whether it's one-on-one or a scheduled meeting, you can still get down to that the presenter level and the remote control level. Quick note here. So a lot of people ask me is like, hey, I'm not able to get into a meeting, or I'm not able to like schedule this meeting, but I'm pretty sure I have access. It's usually related to one of these three things here. If they're not currently having, I always ask them, like, well, do you have an email with that group? And they say, well, no. And it's like, well, you need to have an email in order to be able to do that scheduling. You can always join, and you may not get the reports if you don't have that email afterwards or being able to access that data on the back end. But usually look here or ask your administrator to look here to see what level of access they had to that meeting. All right, so we're going to wrap this this overview up here, and we're going to just talk about the why. Why switch to Teams after you've heard all of those details, and really why we tell people why you should switch to Teams is it's rapidly deployable worldwide. Anywhere that Azure, Microsoft, Office 365 services or Azure services are available, Teams is available. It's been a great solution, especially with current events, to being able to connect to anybody. Whether in a controlled environment or a non-controlled environment, work from home or business internationally. So if you need a solution right now, it's a great all-in-one solution, not just for chat, not just for video, not just for multiple video, not just for recording, but for everything you could need, document sharing and real-time collaboration, things like that. If you're a Skype for Business current user, why you should switch is because Skype for Business is going to be retired in July 2021. I don't know if that's going to be moved due to current events. I haven't seen any information about that from Microsoft, but Microsoft has been really adamant about this date since Microsoft Teams has come out, and they've reiterated this date over the past 2 years. They really want people to get on board now because what they're offering right now is coexistence and interoperability. So you can have Teams and Skype in your environment right now, working at different levels of interoperability to ease your migration process. But after that date, it's not going to be supported anymore, and you're going to have to do that major jump, which could be really jarring for you as an administrator and you for your users. And then last, industry development's really leaning towards the Microsoft Teams certified program, getting their software and hardware certified. So I will say that unfortunately, the backwards compatibility, if you're currently heavily invested in IP phones, smart rooms is not always guaranteed. You need to check with your manufacturer and Microsoft to see that if it is, first of all, but most of what I've seen is actually not. So, and it's going to continue going forward, obviously. So, getting ahead of that and getting new hardware. If you want to have those IP phones, you want to have those smart controls, that's where it's going. And they do have a Microsoft Teams certified program for those devices, just like they had a Skype for Business certified program. And then third-party providers for PBX session-based controllers, SBCs, PSTNs. So this is your on-prem like calling solution. Their third parties are moving forward to being able to coexist or support Teams, with the direct routing that we were discussing, and the support for Skype for Business is going to go away on their side as well. So just know that there's a couple vendors right now that are already offering certified solutions and being able to work. I'll talk about those a little bit later. And I'll wrap things up here. Live events broadcasting, you don't need to have separate services for chat, collaboration, video calling, and live events. You can if you'd like, but if you want it all in one place, Teams is a great option for you. Okay, so let's go into the more technical side of this, what you need to know as an administrator or a network administrator in order to get Teams up and running for your either controlled environment or work from home setup, and what your users need to be able to do from an internet connection perspective. Okay, so the architecture of Teams is heavily reliant on Office 365 and Azure services. So, when I say by that, I mean full functionality. So when we're talking about chat, Teams messaging, the wikis and the file shares, scheduling meetings, cloud voice for actual dial plans, private file sharing. If you want all of those things in place, you need all of the supporting components with Office 365 and Microsoft is bundling a lot of their licenses with all of these things together. So normally you don't have to worry too much about do I have everything already that I need. This is really more for existing customers that are still hosting much of their service in managed servers, like on-prem servers, on-prem Exchange, how you're doing all that. You need to have all of these connections, or at least the hybrid connectivity from your on-prem servers to online servers set up appropriately for a lot of these things to work. So just a couple examples here, starting from the left, the Teams icon itself, the Teams client, you have your IP audio and video calling from peer-to-peer group, your private. That's pretty much always going to be available, even if everything else wasn't. Exchange wasn't, SharePoint's not there, what have you. You could still always be able to do that because you could do that with the free version, which doesn't have any of those things. So moving on to things like private chat, the history of that is stored and relying on an Exchange Online mailbox existing for a user. That's where those things are stored. We talked about before, Teams messages, wiki and file shares. Those are stored at the data level within the group mailbox within Exchange, and then you can also customize how users are able to access at that data level. Either they can just get through Teams, or they can get to where the data is actually stored in Exchange Online and who can administrate that. Wiki and file sharing is relying on SharePoint. So you can either, if you're setting up a brand new, fresh Office 365 tenant, if you don't have an existing SharePoint, that's okay. It's going to be created for you automatically. If you're truly creating a fresh environment, you might have to do one or two, just load SharePoint on your admin center, get into it, make sure that it runs, and then when you start using Teams and creating new ones, it'll automatically create new site collection pages, document libraries for you. Cloud Voice is relying on your choice of either the phone system and direct routing provided by Microsoft, or your on-premise solution, however you're choosing to integrate that. But the reports and the analytics that you can get from Teams, and then their dashboard relies again on having that storage location of a user's mailbox or group mailbox. Last year, private sharing, talked about that a little bit, but that relies on the OneDrive for business side. That's how it keeps it private, not putting it in a SharePoint location, but you can still collaborate in real time on OneDrive documents and data that's stored there. It's just more controlled, obviously, and a user has rights over what they're able to share with other folks or groups of folks. And all of this, again, relies on Azure AD, Office 365 groups, and if you need PowerShell to do some automations if you need that. I skipped over this real quick, but so all of these are included with Business Essentials, Premium, Enterprise E1 or A1 if you're an educational institution, and up. So if you have one of those, you're good. If you're not sure about which one you have, or you have one that is not at that level, you might still have Teams functionality. You might just be missing certain aspects like scheduled meetings, and you just need to check with what is available to your current license, or if an upgrade option is available to you. Networking prerequisites. So again, Teams is an internet service. Got to be able to connect to the internet, and that's specifically Office 365 servers. And there's loads of endpoint servers around the world. Microsoft has their public IP groups around the world that you need to be able to connect to. Those are listed in bullet 3 over number 1. So those are the Teams-specific IP groups that are, again, they have a wide delivery network across the world. But if you had a really controlled IP routing environment for your business or even your home, you just need to be able to make sure that packets can be routed to those addresses over the internet. Usually they are. I've never really seen an environment where when something is sent to 0000 that it's still controlled. So just be aware of that. That's where it needs to connect to. If you are an existing Office 365 customer and you've already gone through the network onboarding, or you've used like the network assessment tool for Skype for Business, know that pretty much all of the protocols are the same. So you wouldn't have to do like any additional network testing. You just might need to check your bandwidth availability and what the impact of Teams is going to be. And there's tools for that. So you also need to have an Office 365 verified domain. And what I mean by that is when you stand up, let's say I stand up a fresh Office 365 tenant, you go in and you want to create something new for your business. By default, you're given an onmicrosoft.com domain. So it's a subdomain of Microsoft. And the X's here represent in the default example of it's usually just a thrown together list string of numbers and letters of what it is. But that's enough for you to get started. So you could get started using Office 365 products with just that domain without doing anything else. Now, most businesses are going to want to get started immediately with a custom domain, yourbiz.com or at whatever your email address is, whatever domain you've purchased. And you can still use that and get started with that, but you need to have it verified first. Quick note here. So Microsoft does not currently offer a service for procuring domains. If you don't already have one, it's not like all within the same screen of doing your domain verification and purchasing a new domain. So you do have to have your domain purchased and hosted or controlled from another party. So you just need to work, if you're not familiar with this concept, you just need to work with your network administrator, your web administrator, of whoever would manage your domain for your business. And then when you verify it, you just do it with simple record verification. And then Office says, okay, yep, we know that you own this domain, you can control it, we can talk with it. And then we'll go ahead and associate our tenant with your domain, and that's how you get those nice, clean, at yourbusiness.com email addresses, or associating SharePoint with certain URLs that you'd like to have. Firewall rules. 80 and 443 are kind of a given, so it is an internet service. You need to be able to connect over those ports. And then specifically for Teams is UDP 3478 and 3481. Rest assured, I actually haven't seen too many issues with this out in the field. If you have a tightly controlled and secure environment, very granular with your ports and your configurations, which is a great secure solution. You just need to make sure that the communication for these ports is able to flow outward. And that's at the software and the net, like every layer of your network. It's easier and simpler for the desktop environment, because when you install Teams on like a Windows environment, it's smart enough to know to make those rules in Windows firewall or your client firewall, whatever's installed there. And it's also included with like Windows updates. So like every time Teams updates, and make sure that those are open, or Windows gets an update, to make sure that those can communicate, regardless of what you might push something specifically with GPO and inadvertently close those ports. It'll open them back up. I have never really seen an issue with this at the software level. I have seen it at the network routing level, and that's, again, if you have most businesses have a little bit of a sophisticated controlling of their hardware firewall component or their routing, and just make sure that those rules exist in there to not block Teams connection. The most common like help desk question you might get when starting this environment out is, oh, I'm in this subnet and I can't get on Teams, but if I get off that subnet or VPN, or I go home, I can get on Teams fine. And that's going to help you realize that there's probably some firewall rules that you need to accommodate. And then last, number 4, routing optimizations. So unfortunately, this could pose a problem for businesses that have really stern rules on how clients outside of their environment are able to communicate. If like it has to be a VPN, or you've got proxy servers for routing your internet access, multiple proxy servers within your business. Every time you have a hop to the internet, you're introducing the likelihood that you're going to have network degraded for your internet connection. You're going to lose some bits. You're going to lose some bandwidth there. Not good for audio video calls, obviously. So if you can avoid certain hops in your clients connecting to the internet, you should. Someone asked me, he's like, "Well, there's no way they're going to have to maintain my VPN environment, and the bandwidth is only so much." If you've got a modern bandwidth allowance for VPN, I'd say you're going to be okay. We're not talking about an astronomical network demand, but in that case, he was asking again, what do I do if like the the desktop has to be connected. It's connected to the VPN even before they log on to the desktop environment. And I'm like, okay, I mean, there's other options. Like you could do their mobile devices, and you can still connect, like your microphone, Bluetooth audio to that, and do your calls and even do video. Or you could there's multiple options there. So there's a couple workarounds. Microsoft is kind of aware and moving clients toward this full cloud solution if you don't need to go through a controlled VPN if you don't have to. But just know that there might be some barriers there for you. And if you have a question about it, or if you have a use case or a scenario that you want to pose to me, we can definitely talk about that. All right, so if you're interested, this is what the bandwidth requirements look like for Teams for the different features, so audio all the way down to HD group calling. So not a lot. If you have I'd say a modern internet connectivity for your business, let's say like 100 megabit per second for business, you're going to be fine. This really only comes to play with like massive buildings that have internet connection and users are constantly communicating over the internet. That can become a problem because that funnel, that choke point of the data bandwidth is going to be limited to your internet egress point, where it's coming in and out of. Because again, this is not a scenario where you can have a server inside your gigabit per connection internal network, right? So you're still always going to have to go through that internet connection point, and this is what that bandwidth looks like. And we'll go into how you get into a report, or you can see like you can do like a network analysis and see what the impact is proposed to be based on number of users, types of calling you're doing, all at like concurrent or average times. All right, so just to review very quickly, Teams client platforms. So starting at the bottom, going all the way to the top. So we have web app. You can get through a web browser. Natively supported for Microsoft Edge and Google Chrome. There's limited support for IE11, Firefox, and Safari. So when you're logging on through those limited support browsers, you're going to lose things like the ability to either like share your screen or do remote control, maybe even chat. It gets really granular, and you can look up those limitations if you're invested in using a certain browser within your organization. But if you're on Google Chrome or Edge, you're usually good to go. You can have desktop installation, 32 and 64-bit. There's a PKG file for Mac, and then Linux you can install as well. They're all available from Microsoft over the internet. You can deliver those either from the internet to the client. You can just enable your users to install it themselves. You can push it with GPO if you'd like. However you want to do that installation, it's pretty lightweight. For mobile, same thing, over the internet, or if you want to put it on, if you've got mobile device management with an app store and that's how you want to do your deployment of Teams, you can do that. Just know that Microsoft is really pushing all of their clients to not surpass your auto update configurations if you have them controlled, but it's designed to auto update from the internet like all the time. So if you don't change anything from default, you don't have to worry about updating it. You don't have to push anything. It's going to update every time. Since you have to connect to the internet, you have to connect to the server to use Teams. It's going to auto update on its own and check that. And it's not going to be like any downtime. It usually does those in the background while you're on it or off of it. So at the enterprise level, you can push it via GPO, or if you have a configuration manager, whether it's Microsoft or a third party, you can push it that way and then not have to worry about it again, because again, it'll update from itself. You can install Teams on, let's say you have a Microsoft Service tablet, Service Hub. You can push it, and it's controlled with your domain. You can push it that way. You can do like a Teams only scenario experience on a Surface tab that you might have and turn that into your controller for your Teams room. You could do a lot of different things like that. And then it's included at the proprietary level with some hardware, like the certified hardware we've been talking about from vendors like Poly or Crestron or Logitech. But those updates are managed by the vendor, and however they set up their own updating for the hardware that they're providing. Last, talking about virtual desktop environments. So you can use Team in a highly virtualized environment, whether it's desktops, whether it's roving desktops, or static desktops. If you're like an institution, an educational institution, that's how you're delivering your desktops to students or something like that. You can do it, but you're going to lose that automatic updating process. There's really technical documentation from Microsoft in how to do this. And you could either have the client installed within the desktop environment or have users go through the web browser to not even manage the installation if the support that's available to the browser is enough for the workload that you're intending for that user. But advise you check in with Microsoft and their documentation if you've got a virtualized environment, because it does change a little bit. Okay, so spend a short time here. Microsoft offers this Teams upgrade framework for success. Basically, just a few pages of information when you are deploying Teams and the technical documentation of what they want you to think about when you're deploying Teams for a business enterprise environment. What you should think about pre-upgrade, how you should go about your actual upgrade, your deployment strategy, how you should go about your maintenance afterwards when you're post-upgrade. The things that I would ask you to focus on really here is don't skip over coordinating your stakeholders. And that's not just administrators, end users, managers. That's everybody who's going to be using it. Make sure everybody is understanding why you're moving to Teams, the features that they're able to there, and then start communicating about those differences in the functionality. So making sure that they understand that when they write a message in chat, that it's different than writing a message to the board, and where those things are going and what they can delete and not in order to maintain their privacy. So really helpful to get everybody's shared understanding, everybody's knowledge about your upgrade to Teams. And then defining your project. So that comes into terms when you want to deploy Teams, not as an all-in-one solution, but just as an isolated solution for a specific workload. Like if I only want to use Teams to work with my SharePoint site, but I don't want it to replace my calling, I don't want it to replace my live events solution, then just make sure everybody's aware of that, so they're not going off and doing workloads that are not intended for that. People are still hosting large meetings on another service when it was supposed to be happening in Teams, or vice versa. Just make sure, and then you can putting those barriers in place so they don't do that. It's really helpful and make sure everybody understands what you're actually using Teams for. And you go on to your environment readiness. That's your network planning with the prerequisites that we talked about, making sure things can work. And then we'll talk about deployment strategy next in the following slide. And then don't forget to do maintenance afterwards once it's deployed. So Teams is evolving rapidly. There's a lot of updates that are being pushed. So always check in with Microsoft to see what the latest features are, see if there's a new capability for you, something that you need to do, or even let's talk about like group access reviews. You can configure reviews. Let's say your environment is configured where anybody can create a new team, but that's going to create more space and data that you have to control. And let's say you don't want to manage that. You could set up access reviews and lifecycling policies to take care of the management and delete those things and archive them over time for you, so you don't have to do so yourself as an administrator. All right, so focusing on just the deployment strategies, what can you do now to actually get Teams out to your users? Well, if you're a new Office 365 user or establishing a new tenant, you're pretty much going to be doing single phase. You're already there. You're not upgrading from Skype for Business or having any type of interoperability with that as well. You can limit that to what functions are being rolled out if you want to roll back certain functions, but the entire Teams environment's already provisioned for you there. So single phase just associated with pushing the entire thing at once, all of the features or just some of the features, however you want to do that, but it's making it available to all of your users. Multi-phase is more for users that are migrating from Skype for Business or need some sort of interoperability, coexistence, want to get really granular with how they deploy either a function or only to certain groups. It's actually what Microsoft recommends for their rollout plans, which you can see on the right for those people upgrading from Skype for Business. And to jump to the right here very quickly, the 4 steps are to first set up your tenant, set up when you procure Teams, if you already have an existing one, making sure all the connections are in place, determine how you want new teams to be created, who the owners are, who the service admins are, how your calling's set up. And then from there, instead of pushing by group, it pushes by function. So it's like, okay, over the next month and a half, we're going to switch from chat on Skype for Business to chat on Teams. And then we're going to introduce people to how to do the document collaboration on Teams, but we're going to leave our meetings within Teams or our other solution until we're ready to do so, until people are familiar with moving in and out of Teams. And then maybe a month and a half, 2 months later, we're going to start migrating our meetings and our conferencing over to Teams and getting away from our older solution. You keep this trend going for each feature that you want to roll out, and they always advise that you do, if you have an on-premise calling plan, to do that last, because there is some intricate details that you need to be on top of as far as emergency calling, how those calls are routed. It's just really helpful in making sure everybody's really comfortable with Teams until you get to those finer details. That's for your users and administrators. Moving on to test groups. If you didn't want to do it by function, you could deploy Teams to certain users as long as they're managed within Azure AD. You have your Office 365 groups. You can just deploy. I would just want to have my pilot group, right? My group that's going to test all of the functions at once, give me some feedback. I'm going to make some changes depending on that, certain policies or features, or test them things out. Or maybe you want to test a new policy about what a guest user or an external access person can do, or what you can do on a live event. You can test that out with isolated groups that you identify. Don't skip over your user adoption plan. So have a plan in place for how users are going to get trained on Teams, both your users and user support personnel, managers. Have your automations in place. Have your information in place that's going to be your branding for Teams invites or emails, things like that, to make sure everybody knows that you're getting to Teams. And you can even configure how, if you're in a Skype for Business environment, how users are notified automatically that they're going to be moving to Teams, or they might come to their computer and Teams might be up one day. You can configure all that works. And then lastly, your final cutover is so key, limiting the access to those old solutions that you had from those users, or else, as some of us might be have experienced prior, is that you deploy a new service, but you leave the old one up, and users are just not going to the new service because they like the old way of doing things. It's that cutover period where you turn those old features off. That's really going to make sure that people are using that new service, the new features of Teams, and you can get reports about if they're moving on their own, or you need to give them, a little bit of a nudge and to say, hey, you need to get over here because we're going to have a cutover at this point. All right, so this slide is specifically for Skype for Business upgrade users, and we put this in here simply because a lot of people are doing that, especially if you are looking into the MS700 certification, which we'll talk about at the end, which is a Microsoft certification for managing Microsoft Teams. Whether you're upgrading from Skype for Business or not, you have to know this, and then there's 2 different paths depending on your current architecture. So very quickly, if you're on Skype for Business Online completely already, it's a lot simpler for you. If, let's say, this is a situation where you don't want to just jump to Teams immediately, you don't want to just get off Skype for Business, you can establish coexistence modes, and we'll go into those in the detail in the next slide. But you assign your coexistence mode of how you want Teams and Skype for Business to work at the same time for your users. You configure how those users are notified and what they can access, and then you determine your deployment phase, whether it's by groups or by function, until you get to that final coexistence mode of Teams only, where everything's on Teams and no one's using Skype anymore. If you're an organization with Skype for Business Server or Server on-premises, you're managing your own solution, you have a few more steps to get to. I will say that this, again, is a hotspot or a barrier for some organizations, because you have to establish some sort of presence on Office 365 and in the cloud. I'll give you a great example of this is, there's an organization out there that they have a compliance rule that passwords for their Azure Active Directory, or their Active Directory for their users and the resources, have to be maintained at the data level, the hash level, on site on a server they manage. How do they get that to the cloud? when they can't. Well, hybrid connectivity is the option to do that. You would establish Azure Active Directory Connect, host an Azure Active Directory online, replicate your accounts, your resource accounts of the users that need to get there, that need that functionality, but you can do intricate things for passwords like allow pass-through password authentication, meaning that the hash is not stored in the cloud, it's still stored on your server that you're managing. You can get really detailed there. That was just an easy example, and you can do some more things with that. The MS700 exam goes into more detail about that. But with hybrid connectivity established, you set in your coexistence mode again, just like in a Skype for Business online migration. And then migrating the users to Office 365 goes into that example that I just talked about. Making sure that the users who are going to be using Teams have the Office 365 licensing that they need. And then once you get all that done, you do your cloud consolidation after you've got it all working. But let's say you're, okay, now we're going to retire some on-site Skype servers and making sure that you don't lose any functionality when you turn those things off there. All right, so Teams modes. Teams modes might seem just like a general term, but it's actually it's more like a proper noun when you're talking about Teams. So as you read through the documentation, you're always going to see this reference to mode. What mode are you in for Teams if you're in an upgrade from Skype for Business environment? And you'll often see these interchangeable terms like migration mode, coexistence mode, Teams upgrade mode, Teams upgrade policy. They all mean the same thing. I hope Microsoft gets a little bit better about choosing one word and sticking with it. But for now, if you're reading technical documentation, just be aware that they all mean the same thing. And they all refer to what coexistence level you're at for your Teams migration. And then real quick, if you're not familiar, when you see like Teams upgrade policy doesn't have any spaces there and it's underlined, and then as well as in the modes in the table, that means that they're synonymous with PowerShell script commandlets, and Microsoft will use PowerShell script commandlets interchangeably with instructions for like the graphical user interface. So it's just something to be helpful, and it's how they explain things. So if we start at the top here of the table, so Teams only. So if you have a current Skype for Business solution and you initiate coexistence, Teams only is the end state. It's what you want to get to. It's where you fully migrated over to Teams. You're no longer doing things on Skype for Business anymore. If you're deploying a new environment, you're in Teams only mode. That's kind of a trick question there, but yeah, your Teams only just means there's no Skype for Business going on anywhere, and that's your endpoint. And there's no rolling back org wide. So if you can do these modes per user or per group base, but once your org wide is on Teams only, there's not support to roll backwards. Okay. So moving on to Islands. Islands is a solution for when you're upgrading from Skype for Business to have both Teams and Skype for Business side by side without communicating with each other. They're not impacting anything. This is more for testing. I really don't recommend using this long term or using this model introducing all of your users to it, because it creates confusion. Well, I'm messaging you in Skype or linking with you in Skype, but you also sent me a message in Teams. I didn't open Teams today, or it just gets messy. Really, I like to only see Islands being used for your testing environment because it doesn't impact anything going on with your current solution while still exploring certain options in Teams. Okay, so moving on here to the third line is read as Skype for Business with Teams, collaboration, and meetings. So this is a coexistence mode for Skype for Business and Teams where user calling and all of that, the chat, all of those core functionalities are still done within your Skype for Business, but you're moving collaboration of shared documents on the SharePoint and all of that, and your group meetings, so your scheduled meetings, to Teams. Your dial plan, calling, private chat, Skype for Business. Collaboration, scheduled meeting, all within Teams. And you have your teams and channels there. It's also known as the meetings first migration technique. You might see that if you're looking at Microsoft documentation, but it avoids any interruption to your current calling plan, how you're doing that within your business. That's an option for you, and you can set that either at the user, group, or org-wide level. All right, Skype for Business with Teams collaboration. So second from the bottom here, this is your calling and your chat and your scheduled meetings are still on Skype. All of that's going on with Skype. This is a really popular choice. And the only thing available within Teams is just the Teams experience for document collaboration, apps, templates, that group messaging board. And like I said, this is the most popular one for people that are just introducing to Teams without impacting, like, oh, I called you and you weren't available, or not wanting to impact or not set up their meeting migration service yet if they have existing recurring scheduled meetings for Skype for Business. It's a really popular choice. And then the last one is Skype for Business only. So you've actually stood up Teams, you've set up your Office 365 tenant environment, which is offering Teams, but you're not using it yet, but it's still staged there. However, you can still join meetings hosted in Teams, whether it's like a federated business or somebody else external, if you need to. So you can actually install Teams in the background of your desktops and not have your users be notified. And if you know a federated business or another user is sending you a Teams invite and they click that invite, their Windows desktop will say, hey, do you want to join this on your desktop or your web client? And they could do either one. It's just for joining meetings. And that would be the first step in your total migration process, moving from a Skype for Business to Teams Total. Again, usually get a few questions here, but if you think of something, I haven't seen any questions come in yet. But if you do think of something, go ahead and ask that there, and I'll address that either here as we move on. We got about 30 minutes here left. All right, so we're going to wrap things up here. We're going to talk about Teams administration roles in the planning process of what you need to, when you're standing up, how you're going to do your administration of Teams, who's going to be in charge of what. There's 4 different administrator roles, levels that you're getting when you are introducing Teams functionality to your Office 365 environment. Starting from the left, in the lowest level, you have your Teams Communication Support Specialist. So the first 2 columns are really geared towards your help desk users. If you have a large environment and multi-tiers of support, and they're really only doing communication support for calling, video quality, handling those reports at the help desk of, oh, hey, I just had a Teams meeting, but my connection was really bad. What's going on here? The communication support specialist and the communication support engineer are able to dive into call quality dashboards within Teams. They're able to see what that was for that user, if it's set up correctly. They get their calling reports that are also sent to the mailbox, see what happened there and determine, oh, it was just your internet connection at the time. Oh, there's something larger going on that's affecting all of our users. Oh, it's on Microsoft's end. They can kind of figure those things out and route your help desk tickets appropriately. So the support specialist is just basic level, and they have to actually search for the individual user they're looking to support at that time. The support engineer has more advanced tools and can see everybody at the same time, as well as broader reports. From there, we have the Teams Communication Administrator. We're in the 3rd column here now. So this person has all of the functionality of the first 2, but is now getting into more management and response to meetings themselves, changing policies, configurations. This is that person that that role that you want to assign to your individual who's managing larger scheduled meetings, maybe external meetings where policies need to be changed or adjusted to allow like guest users or external users or certain users access to certain capabilities. Maybe you want to turn video sharing off during that specific meeting, or have people be muted or not be able to record, things like that. And that's where they can go in and change things here. They can also manipulate assignments of phone numbers to accounts. So if they could be part of your changeover, your turnover workflows, if you have users coming in and out, who's getting what phone numbers assigned if they have a calling plan in a Microsoft phone system. And they can also create new reports in the call quality dashboard. So support engineers and specialists can generate reports based off of existing report templates. Communication administrators can generate new reports. All right, lastly, we have the Team Service Administrator. So this is somebody who has full administration of the entire team service. So not just calling, not just meetings. They can set policy org-wide. They can manage how the devices are working within Teams, membership of users. They can publish new apps, determine what apps are being deployed. They can pretty much manage everything in the Admin Center console, but it's without giving a user global admin access or access to the rest of the administration of your Office 365 tenant. They're not an administrator for Exchange. They're not an administrator for OneDrive for Business or for SharePoint. Caveat with SharePoint there, they are able to create new Office 365 groups because you need that privilege in order to actually create a team. So it's a good way of saying, yes, you can do everything in Teams, create new teams for people, manage, respond to people in there, and create the new groups, organize that, but you're not going to have global admin access to, let's say, like the security and compliance section and what have you. All right, so that wraps things up for the technical prerequisites, the planning, the overview. We're going to now move into a brief demo. We'll go over what the admin center looks like, how to access it, and the client. And then we're going to also get started here with what you need to know. This is a slide that if you are coming here fresh and you need to know, what do I need to know right now to get my business up and running? Well, these are the things that you have to meet. Just to review these very quickly, Microsoft Office 365 tenant, you have to have that set up with either your default domain that they give you, that .onmicrosoft.com domain, or your custom one that's been verified. You need to make sure that your Exchange is configured, and usually if you're standing up like today, a fresh tenant, usually that just means to go into each service as your administrator account and just going in, do the initial configuration, which usually isn't much, clicking through a few things and making sure that they're all spun up accordingly. But Exchange Online, you need to do that for Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, and manage your users in Azure Active Directory. And then last, so your users need to actually be assigned Office 365 licenses. So like you yourself could go in and play and test with Teams at a new tenant if you stood one up, but your users won't have access if you have a group of people that you want to test with until you assign them licenses. And if you're not familiar with that concept of assigning licenses at the per user level, that's again where I invite you to that Office 365, that 300 management level certification to understand how the licensing works at the per user base. There are some licenses still out there that you don't have to assign to users, and those are specific like case-by-case basis where it's just if you create a new user, then that license is pivoted or transitioned to all the users regardless of whether you assign them or not. But I won't get into those because again, those are very specific. But usually you have to assign the Office 365 license to the users that you want to use. Roles and privileges, you need at least the team service administrator to be able to get into the admin center. But if you have if you're a global administrator, you're the administrator for your entire business, you can get into doing things like your information barriers, security policies, things like that. Oh, and don't make sure if you're just been given team service administrator, make sure that you can actually get into the admin center access and have access to Azure Active Directory. Sometimes there'll be like a confliction there if you have really granular roles and rights and what you can and can't view for really sophisticated levels of enterprise. Just make sure you can get into those things. Again, just to review internet connectivity, you got to be able to connect to those two public IPs, and those are the firewall rules that need to be in place. And then as an administrator, you need a browser, at very minimum. You should always have your browser, and then and that's Chrome or Edge. And then admin, that's for admin center access, right? But you also need the desktop client. You can't just do everything within the browser. There's actually some features that are only available within the Teams client to do some administration tasks. I know that doesn't really make sense, and that'll probably change over time as Microsoft is rolling out new features. But I'll give you an example of that when we go into this demo next. And then not listed here, but you could have it PowerShell 6 with the appropriate commandlets installed. Won't get into detail about that today, and that's something that you could research the MS700 Managing Microsoft Teams certification if you wanted training in that. All right, so I'm going to get started with the demo here. Take a quick second to get my Teams client running up here. And it's a great time to review any notes that you might have, ask any questions. If there hasn't anything that's been specifically answered, you have a specific case you'd like me to review, go ahead and let me know. All right. So if you're not familiar with this, so I've just navigated to my admin portal for my Office 365 tenant. This is where your landing spot is for managing your whole Office 365 environment and all of the apps that are supported in there. You can see Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, all of those things here. And from here, I can launch my Teams Admin Center. And if I go back to my portal.office, I can launch my just my Teams itself. So I'll do that right now. Okay, so I've already signed in and authenticated. Normally, if it's your first time signing in, you'd get the sign-in prompts for Microsoft. But I've landed here, and this is a whole bunch of example information that I have in a test environment stuff, and you see all the apps I have. So I have Teams here, and I can launch that. It's going to ask me to, when you're first logging in, if you want to log into the web app or the desktop, and then it'll save your configuration. Since I've already logged in here previously to the web app, it's going to keep that selection. So I got dropped into the web app rather than launching it from my desktop. Okay, great. So this is, if you're not familiar with it, this is the main page that you'll land on when you get to Teams, or one of the main pages that you can be landed on. Sometimes you'll land in the activity feed, but within Teams, this is normally what you'll be exposed to, right? On the very left column is the global navigation within Teams, all those different components that we were talking about, right? Private chat, right? This is where my list would be if I have private chats. It's just me in this testing environment. I don't have anybody else I could chat with right now, so there's nothing here. Moving on to Teams, there is some team setup here for a mock business that I have. So you see sales and marketing has a team, and I can see all the channels within there. If you notice that general channel is included with every single team. Teams with different channels, different types of channels, amounts of channels. And then this channel, for example, go to market plan. You can see all the different tabs here. This is where we talk about all of those different customizations that you can have with ingesting apps, or whether it's a specific file. So this tab, for example, is adding just a single Exchange file to view here that people could work on and work in real time. I can see other people working on this really quickly in here. I can open it in the desktop app if I'd like, but this is the same functionality here that you would see if you were logging in the web app in a new tab. So same thing if you've been working with Office web apps really proficiently, same functionality here. A few more tabs here. This is a PowerPoint example. Tasks app, if you're not familiar with that. And you could add new ones if you wanted to search for a new app. And these are the ones available to me within the Microsoft Office marketplace, but also available that administrators have allowed me to install here. You can see there's a bunch of third-party apps that are really cool. And I can even add in storage from other cloud storage solutions. Like if I have Dropbox, if I have AWS S3, if I have like another tenant for OneDrive, anything like that. Google Drive, you can add those. You can add those in here, whether if it's for an organization or your individual account, grant access, and you can add them in here and be able to share with those places. So that's really helpful. My calendar is going to show here if I have an Exchange account, so I do in this thing. And if you don't have an Exchange account or you're in that freemium version, you probably won't see this. This will go away. But you can see that this will show me all my meetings that are available. I have one here. I can schedule a new meeting that's going to incorporate those Teams details that I want to have. I can assign it to a different channel, and this will assign either this determines whether the calendar invite is hosted on the shared mailbox or if it's shared on my mailbox, and who can manipulate it, and where the reports go, where the chat history goes for that meeting that can be ongoing. So if this is a recurring meeting and I wanted to assign it to the general channel for my business, and all of the chat would be saved in the history. So as you go on, you could always go back and access certain chats for that meeting to see, oh, what was it that somebody said 2 weeks ago about this? Let's go find out. Or quickly access recordings if you have that as well. Same features you would see here as you would in Exchange, like scheduling assistant and all of that. Calls, this is if I have my connectivity set up for dialing domestically or internationally. I have one phone assigned here. I haven't made any calls, but this is something that I've gotten with my test environment. But if you had that connected and set up, this is where you would see everything. There's also some interoperability here with like chat or Teams. So if I had a list of calls here, there might be like a history of somebody that I called. I can click on them and chat, and then it'll jump over to my chat window. Vice versa, if I had a chat window here, I could click on that person and say, make a dial call rather than a video call, and it'll pop me back over to calls. So last bit here, files. This is where your files that you've been shared specifically privately from your Skype for Business online account, or I want to ingest Skype for Business online files without where the files are not hosted there currently. So it's like, instead of going through Skype for Business to host them and then share them through Teams, I could just drop them here and share them with people. And I would do that from chat with my chats open with somebody. But you could also add your own cloud storage account. If you did want to add it for the entire team, you could just add it for yourself and add some things here. So here's some example information that's been added that I could share. And you can open it in OneDrive. A lot of these connectivity features, like with SharePoint, if you were to go into files there, you always have the option to open those things wherever you want to open them. So here, I can open any of these files in SharePoint if I like. All right, so we're going to move on. Last few minutes here, move on to what it looks like for the Admin Center. So I'm going to go back to my Office 365 homepage for my Admin Center. I'm going to go to Teams. If it's not available to you when you first go looking, it's because you have to select all. And if it's still not there, it means that you don't have rights to see Teams, or it's not deployed within your environment. All right, so this is what it looks like when you first land on the page. If you have user activities, since this is a test environment, I don't have anything right now for my reports, but usually this is built out with more information. I could rapidly search for a user if I was looking for somebody that's having a problem, see my organization information that's been up to date by administrators. If Microsoft is publishing new information, you might see some pop-ups here about what's coming down the line in the future, what have you. And then you can also see your upgrade status, which you can get to through another place if you're doing an upgrade from Skype for Business. So we're not going to go into all of the features here. We're going to talk about just the most important ones and the ones that we've gotten the most questions on. So we're going to start with org-wide settings. And this is where you can see the settings are going to affect everybody who's getting onto Teams, how it's delivered, the functions that are available, external and guest access, things like that. I'm going to go into Team settings first. So this is where you see the overall features that you can enable or disable for your Teams functionality. Things like tagging, so it's like a modern, like hashtag. I could hashtag somebody's name rather than typing their email address if I want to call them out in a meeting or a chat or with a file or something like that. How my email integration works, if they're able to send, instead of, let's say I wasn't at my Teams client, but I wanted to tag some information from an email to a Teams channel, I could just email that channel, and you can turn that feature on and off here rather than going to paste it in the message board or something like that. You can turn off if cloud storage from third parties is authorized for each of these, and I believe they're going to be adding more here soon. So you got Google Drive there, Dropbox. You can determine if your users are able to see your organization structure within Teams, like what other teams are available, if they're only able to see the teams that they've been added to. You can turn that on and off here. And then connecting with devices, a couple features that you could turn on and off here about setting a PIN if you have a conference line associated with a meeting, things like that. If you need to have secondary access when they access, so multi-factor authentication. This is just a light place to do it. You can get more sophisticated multi-factor authentication within Azure AD. All right, and then wrapping up here with just org-wide settings, guest access and external access. Starting with guest access, this is where you go to turn it on and off across your org. So if you just wanted to restrict anybody from allowing guests, inviting guests, having guests work within Teams, you can do that here, and you can either do that across the board or you can do that by feature. So turning off private calls for guests. This is that Meet Now feature for guests that are not within your environment with an Exchange account. You can determine what they can do in meetings. They can not have IP video. They can. That's that Meet Now feature you can turn on and off. And then messaging, what they're able to do. You get really granular with how the messages work. Teams has a lot of modern communication trends like memes and stickers and GIFs and all of that. And you can control all that, and you can have real-time moderation for a lot of your content. So, if somebody posts something, Microsoft has built in, moderation for the types of content that's being delivered or tagged, for like web pages and stuff like that. External access, this is where I would go configure my federation. So if I want to allow or deny a specific domain, I could do that here. And this is where I turn that feature on for allowing to search for other teams and users, whether they're in Skype for Business or Teams with other federated domains. And you can also control this from Azure Active Directory or your Office 365 account. Okay, we're going to move on to messaging policies. So you can see that there's one org-wide setting, and these are all the features that are available within the messaging, like I was just talking about for guest users, but this is for everybody. So if you wanted to just change how people are able to communicate and chat across your entire org, this is where you do it. Again, you see like read receipts, memes, stickers, if they're allowed to post URLs and go to those things, if they're allowed to do quick voice messages, however you want, you can really get controlled with how people are able to do manipulate their chats. Probably the most important ones here that I would concern yourself with are delete and sent, edit sent messages. So you can actually change some things that you've sent in the past or delete them, and know that that data is stored, whether it's in that Exchange mailbox location or the end user's mailbox location. And if they delete something, it's soft deleted for 30 days. And by default, after 30 days, they're deleted permanently. You can go in and change that if you need to, but just know that they might not see it in Teams, but it's still out there somewhere. Or if you turn it off for them completely, what they write is stored in data and they're not able to access to it, depending on what your data lifecycling policy is. All right, so we're going to take a look at meetings now. You can go into how you establish your conference privileges. These are all the numbers available to me that I could assign to certain meetings that I'm establishing a new meeting. Here's my meeting policies, and I can establish a new one if I like. These are the features that are able to, that are available or visible to participants of a meeting. So I can allow Meet Now in channels, the Outlook add-on that enables the Outlook feature when you go to schedule a meeting from Exchange or your Outlook software, that little tab right there that you would normally see. Allowing schedule private meetings, so you can do a meeting where only certain users are allowed. If transcription's available for your meetings, transcribing spoken words to text and things like that. Allowing video or just audio, limiting bandwidth rates here, you could do that. What types of content can be shared within a meeting, get really granular with all this, and then control at the meeting level how your participants and guests are able to access the meeting. That's where you would change some of these settings here. Meeting settings, these really just have to do with how the meetings are sent out to users. So you can customize your branding here with email invitations. This is where you turn on or off that anonymous user access for anybody to be able to get into a meeting. And then you can also control quality of service. Quick note about quality of service is it is available out of the box with Teams, but you need to make sure that QoS is applied at every level of your network that it's going to touch. So firewalls, software firewalls, hardware firewalls, routing, what have you. And then live events and policies, same thing here. This is where you would go in to establish different parameters for your live events, who's able to access them, what presenters are allowed to do, who's able to do certain things, and then all these policies you need to manage the users from. So you kind of see this, there's settings and policies for each one of these functions. Settings are the features that are available, or the capability to have the features available, and then policies are the features available that are applied to each of the users. So right now this is global, but if I wanted to apply it to a specific user or a group of users, I could. All right, moving into managing teams. So this is where you can manage the teams and their associated Office 365 groups. You can do it from here, or you could do it from Azure Active Directory if you wanted to just create a new group or team from there. Wanted to add a new one. Here's my options for adding a new one, and I can make it even private or public and determine how visible things are to other people. And I can change the classification if I have classification labels set up for my environment. There's nothing available here because I haven't actually set up any labels, but just know that's an oncoming feature with Teams that tags certain data files as, you could have it for official use only or what your classification needs to be. So if you notice here, there isn't an option for me to, if I like how a team is set up with certain members, that I want to create a new one, just with all of their tabs, how everything's set up. I really like that the members of that team are just going to go to a new team. How do I do that? You can actually do that in here right now. You need to actually do that within the client itself. So if I were to go to create a new team, I can select a group here to create that's not actually what I was looking at. Give me a second. Which group would you like to use to create a team? So this is asking me if I've identified a group that's already been created that doesn't have a team associated with it. So I'm going to choose that. So this is kind of getting in here. What I think is going on here is that I think I maybe hit a limit for creating what I wanted to do for creating a new team. Normally, if I were to click that, I get the option for creating a new team, and I also think it's because I'm in the web app and I need to be within the Teams client to create the team. But so I just created one from an existing Office 365 group. Normally I get another option there for creating one from an existing team, and if I want to copy their tabs. It doesn't copy the data, so I wouldn't see all of the messaging in somebody's team or all of the files. I would just see the structure up here, the templates that you normally see. And that about wraps things up. There's a few other options here. You can manage your users, very simple to understand here, and you can go and turn things on and off for people. You can also manage this in Azure Active Directory. This is per user policy essentially. And then your locations and your emergency addresses. This is where you configure your emergency addresses and their actual geolocations that you can later reference for your calling plans. Because I did say it, I do want to go into a little bit. I want to talk about the reports that are available. So reports out of the box that are available with Teams are usage, device usage, and then your PSTN connectivity and things like that. Since I don't have PSTN connectivity configured right now, the only thing I'm able to do is Teams users and data reports. And you select the date range of what you're looking for. I don't have any other users in here except for myself, so it just shows as my single user here. But normally I would see some graphs here, and I could export to Excel if I'd like. I'll get you something with a little bit more information. I'm going to go to, instead of the reports here, I'm going to go into the planning and the network planner. And this is what I use to set up my environment. This is what I use to see what the bandwidth pull on the for Teams within my environment was going to be. So I created a site called Site 1, and it has all of these parameters in it. Like Site 1 is going to have 100 users. They're connected via WAN, and that's the WAN internet link with 100 megabits per second. And then I go and generate a report off of that, and I can see what that pull is expected to be for an average use case. And it even calculates in there like only 80% capacity, maybe 20 people are working from home. And I've allocated a total of 30% bandwidth from my company in this measurement. So you can see that 30% line here. My predicted impact is well below that, so I'm good to go in this case. All right, so that wraps up our demo, and we'd like to open it up now for some questions. I haven't seen anything coming through yet here, but we'll give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions now, and you can jump on your microphone or you can ask it in the chat. All right, so I haven't seen anything come through yet. If I missed something, I apologize. Definitely send it again. But I'll go through a quick list of FAQs that we've gotten in the past or things that are going on right now with Microsoft and Teams. So talk about migrations from Cisco Unified Communications, Zoom, or other third-party solutions. The best way to go about that, if you're migrating to Teams, the best answer we really can give you is you need to work with your Microsoft, your vendor, your provider of the Microsoft products, and then the third-party vendor that's going to be delivering your, like if you have an SBC or something like that, and then trying to find some Teams certified hardware, simply because it's really dependent on your specific situation. You can do a lot with Teams, and they have a lot of graphics in the Microsoft documentation for different possible scenarios. If you're, your SBC, your PBX, how all of that is going to be routed and working. And I really advise that you just work with your provider and talk about some of the options that are available. I did say a note earlier, so like one of the vendors that I know is actually supported and in the technical documentation for Microsoft for a direct routing circumstance, audio codes, they have SBCs that are certified to support routing to Microsoft Teams for calls. Another question we get is for scheduling meetings or people not being able to schedule meetings. They'll say, I got this group of users or this group of licenses that I've assigned to my users, and they're able to join meetings or meet now and call and connect with somebody, but they're not able to like schedule a meeting within their Outlook within Teams. Why is that? And it's because usually that person doesn't have an Exchange mailbox associated with your tenant for whatever reason, whether they're a guest, whether they're on a limited license, like the older licenses that are no longer offered anymore by Microsoft, like that exploratory communications license. If they can't schedule a meeting, it's usually because they don't have access, or they have an Exchange mailbox themselves, or access to the group mailbox where they can schedule those meetings. And therefore, assign the links that are going to exist and people can go, because by doing that, you're reserving some space on a Microsoft server to host your meeting under a URL, specific URL. One question I've gotten in the past is, how do I set up a test environment for my users? And you can go that either for yourself or administration, so you can sandbox. You can go about that in multiple ways. I always just ask. Microsoft currently, right now, is being very friendly in how they're able to support people testing and getting involved with teams. So if you have a provider of Microsoft products, always start with them. Say, this is what I want to do, and what's your option available to you. They can either cut you a completely separate tenant, make a service available to you in your current tenant. They can talk with you about like, oh, you already have it, but you want to isolate it to a test group of users. What's the best way to go about that? What you saw today in my demo, that was actually a test environment provided by Microsoft for teaching purposes. So, I'm able to set those things up there so that functionality is obviously available to other people who are in pursuit of it. Just be aware that you might lose some functionality for true testing. Like, I only have a single calling line assigned to me, and I don't have like other users or like Teams or rooms somewhere that I could mock set up, or that equipment that I could play with. All right, last question gotten very recently is, what are we doing or what's available to you if you need to go further than this? This is the top level overview. I need to get involved. I need to get trained to be a full Microsoft administrator, and I need to do some automations, or I need to do something like that. Where do I go? Okay, so there's two certifications. The one that's primarily focused is MS 700, Managing Microsoft Teams. That's a certification within Microsoft. Then that gives you the Teams Administrator Associate certification. So it's just one test, and then you get the certification. Very heavily, it's all Teams, but you will do some configurations, or be tested on some configurations for PowerShell, Skype for Business upgrades. You'll be asked to assess different scenarios and capabilities and needs of different environments, given some things to look at as far as calling requirements, security requirements, messaging requirements, and selecting the best option for each case use. So that's what's included. It's a multiple choice question currently. It's between 40 and 50 questions. There's no lab, and there are some parts of the quiz or the test that you have to answer, but you can't go back to. So just be aware that you're training for that. And then Skill Me Up and Copsgility are going to be publishing very soon a full training course for this that includes not only presentations and guided practice, but demonstrations and lab environments where you can go in and test and do some certain things. But with Teams available right now, you can already start getting getting experience testing yourself, either with a freemium account or even going through, like if you wanted to do this, you go in through the standard free offerings for Microsoft for business testing accounts or enterprise by just putting in a separate email that you might have. Whatever's the best option for you to get follow-on training. But look forward in the next coming weeks that we're going to be releasing our MS700 training within Skill Me Up and Copsgility, and that can be delivered online, and it will be available online in Skill Me Up, but it'll also be catered and delivered for you, your business, whether it's in person or virtually. There's also the MS7 or the MS300 deploying Microsoft 365 framework. It's not a certification. It's a test that you can take, but you have to take 2 of those tests to earn the certification. But the certification is the Teams Administrator Associate. So why wouldn't you just take the MS700, right? Well, the MS300 goes into more of the Office 365 administration level, the things that you need to be aware of for managing groups, practicing with PowerShell, learning all the different admin centers that go into like Exchange Management, SharePoint, the Security and Compliance Center for managing like multi-factor authentication, what devices are allowed to connect, who can connect to your stuff, doing some limitations, information barriers, everything there is covered in the MS300. So it complements and it even covers some Teams-specific topics. But if you wanted to just do Team-specific stuff, the MS700. However, if you found yourself studying for the MS700 and you find yourself lost or not as proficient on some of the MS365 assumptions that may be made with studying for that, MS300 and the courseware for that is somewhere to look. And Copsgility and Skill Me Up does have content on that, and I believe it's being updated currently. And so you can look for that as well to being able to study either virtually or have something delivered in your specific environment. All right, I'm going to take one last look here for any questions. Make sure I haven't missed anything. All right, so nothing yet here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Quick summary of what we've gone over. So we talked about current events and how Microsoft can help you with Teams right now in response to COVID-19 or in emergency situations, or if you need something that's rapidly deployable, what you can do right now. Talks about all the key features that administrators are mostly interested in when they're talking about migrating to Teams, or what workloads Teams can replace if you have existing services already in place. We talked about what you need to know to get started as far as networking prerequisites and internet connectivity, your administration levels, your roles, the architecture that you need to be aware of, the supporting software that's required with Office 365, everything you need to know to get started. And then we talked about the basics for administrator functionalities, meaning like how you would go about in the client and the Teams admin center to access certain things. I know we did it very lightly, but those are at least, it's just a quick crash course in order to understand if you were just missing, I don't know where to change the setting, where do I go to do that? Hopefully that helps you out. If you need to learn more, strongly advise you to go ahead and look at the MS700 test by Microsoft, and then look for the course training that is going to be out soon which gets much more involved in how to set each of those settings, what each of them do, best practices for establishing a secure environment, limiting functionalities if you need to limit those things, how to do all those things. All right, if you enjoyed today's webinar and you want to learn more, here's all of the options available for you through Skill Me Up or Copsgility. You can give us a call, contact us at email sales, and that's our website below. Just go ahead and reach out to your account manager, or reach out to us on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have a question on how to get more training, and not just on Microsoft Teams or Office 365, but everything that we offer, including Azure, many cloud services, both at the top level and at the very detailed level. I want to thank everybody for joining us in our webinar today. My name is Ryan Romero.